we're impoverished psychologically, and we're impoverished in terms of values, as well as the fact that we lack resources. And I think that we've allowed that to happen over decades of just walking away from urban centers, turning our heads and allowing things to happen. I agree that we need change, but I believe that as a government representative, my responsibility is to the Constitution of the state of New Jersey, which says that the state of New Jersey is to provide a thorough and efficient public education. So I want to fix public education. I don't mind there being creative alternatives to special students who have special talents and things like that, but that cannot be the substitute for what our responsibility is. And I honest to God believe that if you want to believe, if you want to support choice, and we support public choice. That means if I live in Trenton, but I want to take my kid to Princeton because I'm a Mercer resident and it's within a certain radius, then maybe that's one of the choices that I should have. But at the same time, we need to look at how we can strengthen the urban experience. I remember a time when you couldn't, if you lived in Mercer, you wanted to go to Trenton High School. You didn't want to go to Princeton. You didn't want to go to Ewing. You wanted to go to Trenton because Trenton had all the AP courses. Trenton had all of those sort of esoteric educational experiences that you want for your child, because that was the center. There was a time when the cities were the center of positive activities. Well, we've kind of allowed the white flight, to take all of the resources and expectations and hopefulness to the suburbs, and we're left with really very, very bad conditions in our urban centers. But we've got a responsibility to fix that, because public education is our responsibility, and we can't supplant public education with enough private or other kinds of alternatives to make it work for everybody. And at the end of the day, for me, that's my responsibility, to make it work for everybody.
Same question, Assemblyman Wimberly. What's the impact of poverty? And there's so much discussion. That's all we're hearing with this presidential. And I know why we have to save the middle class, because they are taxpayers and continue to pay taxes. But in many of the cities, it's really folks who are struggling with not having jobs, and they are on welfare, and those are still sending their kids to school. So poverty is almost like not even being talked about in this national agenda enough. What do you think of its impact on public schools?
It's a major concern for me as an elected official, because when I see the commercials or when I hear people talking about the middle class, well, I represent the impoverished class, as some of them says. The people that I represent now, you're talking about high foreclosures. Even if they're not homeowners, they're renters, or our public housings have been torn down. They can't afford the affordable housings that have been put up. All has an impact on education. The mental health issues that we're faced with in our cities, it's really has a major, major impact on education. If Johnny goes home and daddy's laid off and mommy's on drugs and the brother is, has a mental illness, the educational foundation is not there for that children. And that's for a large amount of our children. So just the health issues that we face every day. Many things are talked about, Obamacare and some of the issues that are going on with that. That has an impact on education. Because if you're not healthy, if you can't see, if your teeth are not right, you can't eat right, all this has an impact on education. So when you talk about the middle class, I'm not dealing much with the middle class in my district as far as educational concerns. I'm dealing with the very poor, the voiceless, the people that need a hot meal, need to make sure that they have a home to go to every day, and not worried about sleeping on couches. As a teacher of 9 years at Eastside High School in Patterson, the stories, 23 years ago are the same stories, 23 years later, regardless of the amount of money they put in the district. The same money that is going into the districts and going right on our highways, hitting Route 20s and Route 80s and the parkways, are not staying within our communities to make sure we don't have the poverty issues that we have. We need to make sure that when people come in our communities, that they invest in our communities. And I'm talking about owning homes in our communities, which will improve education. If our teachers lived in our communities and they sent their kids to schools in our communities, we have a different educational system.
Professor Farrell, talk to us a little bit about the relationship between parent and teacher, and teacher in the school environment and community, and its impact or relationship to student performance.
Oh, certainly the relationship between parents and teachers are significant. And in many urban areas, there have been tensions between parents and teachers. But what is occurring as legislatures have pulled money out of these urban centers all over the country, then that increases the tension. I'll give one example. In the Chicago teachers' strike, when you read the newspapers, they said, well, the teachers, they make on average more than $70,000 a year. They need to be there for the kids, and this is why they're striking. But when you read the fine print, the teachers say, well, it's hard for me to deal with the challenges that the children bring to school. I'm not averse to dealing with them, but last year I had 35 kids in my class. This year I got 50 of that. Say, that's the problem. What I want you to do, and I'm willing to deal with all of the homicides that have been higher among school-age children in Chicago than any other city in this country over the last 2 years. And teachers say, I'm willing to deal with that, but what I want you to do is re-employ some of those social workers that you laid off so they can reach out to the families. And so Mayor Emanuel said, no, I'm not going to do that. You got to do this, and then I want to evaluate you at 40% of your evaluation based on how well you teach that kid when the class size have been increased by 25%, when we have laid off social workers, and when kids were going to school in the spring and the temperature inside the building was 95 degrees. They said, we're going to still hold the, so they demonize teachers, they demonize administrators, and then they take no responsibility. And Karen Lewis, the president of the union, and they would demonize the union, say, no, we're going to fight that. We're going to draw the line. And then Emmanuel backed up because he got the call from President Obama. So you need to solve this.
Let me move on. Let me ask you, recently a number of legislators had some online learning experiences. They actually went and had some experience here, members of the New Jersey State Legislature. Is there room, or what is the role of online learning, as you see it, in the future to help children in urban centers? Let's start with you, Assemblywoman.
Well, I think that if you're Gabrielle Douglas or someone of that ilk, and you're traveling around the world, and you need to be engaged in your learning, then online learning might be a very good tool for you. But that's a very special student. For the everyday average student, I believe they need the value of the socialization. They need the accountability, and I don't think that virtual learning experiences are very helpful in the main for young people. I didn't have what you're talking about as an online educational experience, but as a legislator, I take an ethics test online, which is one of the most boring, disengaging, just horrible experiences that you have to do. And I know that I go to it and come back to it and go to it and come back to it. And there's nobody over me saying, okay, did you get this? Did you get this? Did you get this? Did you do this? Did you do this? So I don't think that that's an alternative learning experience in the main.
So you're suggesting that although we not just need high tech, we also need some high touch with our children. We got to touch our kids. That's what you're trying to say.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you, Assemblyman Troy Singleton, the same question. How do you feel about online learning? Is that helpful to urban children?
Well, I think Bonnie sort of hit the nail on the head. I think there is, I would add, perhaps an extended class of individual where that also can be useful. We see many kids, and I have the great pleasure of representing one of the most affluent areas of our state, as well as one of the poorest. So I get to see the educational dichotomy from both ends. But I also think for some of the children who have challenges going to schools in certain areas, in certain neighborhoods, because of what we've all said, the surrounding environment, that we all need to take ownership of and remove some of the toxic nature from that. Online learning can be a useful tool. It should never, and to Bonnie's point, I associate myself with that 100%. It should never substitute having a child in front of a teacher and on any level. But in certain instances, there needs, I look at, I'm a carpenter, I look at it as adding another tool in our toolbox to look at it as a way of looking at trying to deliver educational value, but it should never substitute for the actual experience of being in a classroom. Bonnie correctly said, with the socialization amongst your peers, as well as having a teacher right in front of you. But there could be room for it for an expanded class of individuals.
All right, panel.
Can I just say one thing about that? I'm so sorry. Yes, very briefly. It also is not something that's going to work in the urban environment where they have no access to the internet to go online. So I mean, it's not a tool necessarily that works for that population.
And sometimes there's a digital divide.
But there is by all means by a digital divide, and that may be a digital chasm more than a divide. But then again, that's also our responsibility as those of us who are stewards of our state's financial dollars to make sure that we begin to start working to bridge that divide. Bonnie's point is well taken. Kids that don't have the opportunity to have a computer in their home and only have one at a library where it's a terminal with 4 or 5 and you got 30 kids, that's not online learning. That's not the ability to do it in a correct way. But we need to factor that piece in and address it. It shouldn't be done in a vacuum and say online learning is going to work in Patterson and Camden and Trenton and just go ahead and have at it when we don't have children that have the tools to be able to take advantage of it.
All right, panelists, now I'm going to ask y'all to speed up these answers because I got a lot more to cover and not a lot more time. But what I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to start with you, Troy, and then I'm going to go to you next, Kevin. There's discussion right now of a longer school day, something that's employed by some of the charter schools. That's a discussion floating around Trenton right now. Is that a good idea or bad idea? Longer school day, maybe more time on task is the thought thinking.
I think there's a lot of crazy stuff that comes out of Trenton, but that's probably one of the best things I've heard. I will tell you right now, and I know Kevin can elaborate this far better than I, but we still educate our children by a model of when we were an agricultural society, the way the seasons work and the way the time of day and et cetera, et cetera. We need to change that paradigm because we are falling behind children on a global scale. And that is, as our economy becomes more global, we're no longer competing between Morristown, a town that I represent, and Willingboro, the town that I grew up in. Those kids aren't competing with each other. They're competing against kids from Belgium. They're competing with kids from Japan. It's a worldwide economy. And those children are going to school. They don't start their day at 7 in the morning and are going by 2:30, 3 o'clock. There's a longer school day, a longer school year, and we need to aggressively look at that to make sure our youth are able to compete on the world's economy.
Yeah, globalization is kind of the big word in the real world. Tell me, Kevin, longer day, longer school day, does that make sense? Does that have value?
It goes back to this whole toolkit. All of the things that we're talking about that will lead to a positive effect and value added for our children, we should explore. There should be no doors closed. We should open up every door, look at it. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, close it up. When your car doesn't work, after a while, you go buy a new car. When your sneakers don't work, after a while, you buy a new pair of sneakers. When you want to change your suit, you change your suit. It's all about choice. It's all about having the power to make an effective choice about our children's education. So, if it's about developing and collaborating with the union, that's what we're going to do to be able to drive what Assemblyman Singleton is talking about. If it's looking at distant learning and building out a community of people that can effectively use it as a tool, that's what we should be doing. If it's sitting down and having a broader discussion about math and science and creating innovative schools throughout the state of New Jersey to drive that, to make us competitive, that's what we should be doing. Really, what's happening is our urban centers are so locked into this whole poverty debate that we're not looking towards the future. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Poverty says that we are in this situation. This is where we are, and these are all the negative factors that are keeping us locked here. But we have some keys to turn that car and drive it down the road. And what we do when we do that, when we make that decision, we can have these kinds of conversations in a very, mature and adult way that's going to drive some return and value in our community. That's where we need to be. So I'm not opposed to the toolkit. I'm not opposed to any of those things that we can analyze and assess and use as an opportunity to make us competitive.
Professor Farrell, recently, Governor Christie signed a teacher tenure reform bill. What's your thoughts on teacher tenure reform? Is this reform worthy, have value?
I think, the state's teacher union signed off on that. So, and I think there is room to reform anything as the environment changes when we're in the global economy. So I'm not opposed to tenure reform. I believe in tenure. I'm a university professor. I've had tenure for 30 plus years, so I really believe in it. so I'm biased. But the real issue is, and I think it was pointed out by Kevin and Troy, we have to get to the details. We have to compete globally, but to compete effectively, it costs money. We talk about Estonia, Ireland, all these other countries that are outstripping us. They invest heavily in the population at the lowest socioeconomic level. Schools are well equipped. They have all of the modern bells and whistles. And when they increase the school day, they increase the pay of the